Universal Studios.
We're back live inside Studio 10. Research shows that Florida, believe it or not, has the third highest rate in the nation for children who have died for preventable reasons.
Well, we have with us today representatives of agencies who've joined together to lead a child safety, public awareness, and education campaign in Hillsborough County to help parents and caretakers of children understand what they can do to help prevent tragedy from happening in their homes. And we're joined today by Nick Cox and Susan Martin Warren. And Nick, first of all, tell us a little bit about this organization and who all is involved in it.
Sure. Well, what it is, the Children's Board of Hillsborough County is leading up this effort. I'm a member of the board, leading up this effort to basically address preventable child deaths. Day to day, I'm the regional director for the Florida Department of Children and Families, and I started noticing that we have an incredibly high amount of deaths. I get reviews of every death in this region, the Suncoast, the Gulf Coast of Florida. And it seemed like so many of them were preventable. Drownings, co-sleepings, people picking poor caregivers, which is what Susan and I are going to talk to you about today.
Now, co-sleeping, that's a child and
sleeping with your baby.
And they roll over on
them. They roll over on them. I mean, basically, I say it's like loving your kids to death. But, I mean, I look at all of these and I realize they're so preventable. And then I started realizing over 60% of these deaths that we've had on the Gulf Coast are preventable deaths. I mean, people hear about the abuse, the neglect, and everything that's high profile, and there's so many that are preventable. And so I started talking about it, and I went to the Children's Board, and I spoke to them, and I said, isn't there something we can do? And by God, the Children's Board just picked it up and has run with it. And us, along with the Healthy Start Coalition, people like Susan, we've had CBS Outdoors, people like Channel 10. I mean, everybody has really stepped up and pitched in for this campaign.
And it seems like it's amazing that you have to do things like this, but it's important work that you're doing, and that a lot of this, as you were just saying, is really just common sense.
Simple stuff. I mean, when I had babies, I mean, my oldest is 18 years old now. I used to put her to sleep on her stomach or on her, you know, the wrong way. I mean, it's back to sleep. I used to put her to sleep on her stomach. I mean, things like pool safety and everything we all hear about. Do we really practice it? I mean, Susan can tell you it can happen to anybody.
Well, Susan, let's get into your story then, because as Nick mentioned, we're talking about maybe a particular caretaker shouldn't have been with the baby at a certain time of stress. Just tell us what happened with you.
Actually, during working and actually in the process of working in health education, my husband was home taking care of my two children. And
what ages are we talking about?
At the time, my older one, son, was 3 and Graham was 3.5 months, and actually ended up shaking Graham out of frustration because of his crying.
And this is what Graham's brain scan looked like then when you took him to the hospital, right?
Actually, that was taken a year after. And
really?
So this is what I want to show, is that the devastation of shaken baby syndrome is lifelong and long-lasting. And that is essentially a part of his brain. One side of his brain is completely damaged and non-functioning.
So that will never be able to heal itself?
That will never be able to heal itself.
Right.
However, despite desperate prognosis of death and some real severe disability, Graham is a miracle. I've been very fortunate in that he has regained mobility and speech and all sorts of things that put him really only a couple of months behind his peers right now. But it is lifelong. He has vision impact. He will have learning disabilities, attention deficit, impulsivity, and so again, it's in seconds. Whoever you place your children with, seconds.
Is there any way to tell if someone is predisposed to doing this, to shaking an infant? Because I mean, if you've ever had little kids, you know, and they're crying and crying and crying, I mean, it is really frustrating. But are there any symptoms or any warning signs to look for?
There can be symptoms. But the reality is this: a lot of people, and I mean, Susan's is an extraordinary story. A lot of people, I mean, they will have boyfriends, girlfriends. They will have people that just come into their lives and they think they're in love, and all of a sudden they move in, and it's not necessarily just a caregiver. It's somebody that they don't necessarily expect that is living with them and is just around the child. Again, Susan's is extraordinary, but I think what Susan brings to us is it can happen to absolutely anybody. But there isn't nothing in particular. But, you know, you want to know about their background beyond them just telling you. Just simple things, common sense things. Don't think that just because they haven't brought it up, it doesn't exist, because it might. You know, and really caregiver choice. I mean, there's some high-profile cases. We recently had the baby that was thrown out the window on I-275. I mean, and we were very heavily involved in that. that. And the problem was that baby was allowed to be around somebody who was, I'll say it, an animal. And you know, whose fault is that? There's no need in placing fault right now. We need to try to help that person with her choices.
You know, I think it's important to point out, too, though, that what you all are doing as far as educating the public is so important, because I'm sure your husband was just frustrated in the moment. This isn't somebody who doesn't love the baby. He probably didn't know what he was doing could impact the baby in that fashion.
I think it is critical to prevent and save lives, but also to educate. We do not want anyone in Hillsborough County, across the nation, that doesn't know that shaking an infant or small child out of frustration will not harm them. It will harm them, and
right.
that is not an appropriate way to handle that. And you asked about stressors. I think one of the things that we know is crying absolutely is a #1 trigger for that frustration and anger. And it's very, very important that we, as a society, understand that crying is normal. Babies will cry. Parents have a lot of pressure on them. And we need to, again, normalize the fact that this is the way infants communicate. And whoever you choose to put in the place of that caregiving responsibility needs to be able to handle that stress and frustration that is natural.
She's right. It's really an awareness thing, too, because, I mean, any of us sitting right here right now, you get a crying baby who's screaming their head off at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you want to snap. I mean, I'm a dad. I've been there and done that. But you've got to have that something that tells you you're not going to do it. And, I mean, sometimes it takes a matter of being aware of it and controlling it. And Susan's absolutely right. I mean, we're talking about really good people who love their children who can do this. And it's just a matter of controlling that, but it's also a matter, beyond like Susan's story, of caregiver choice. Making sure you know who is around your children, whether it's people in your home or where you're placing your child.
You go to the website there on your screen, and we'll put it up there for you one more time for more information. Children's Board of Hillsborough County. Dial them up for more info, or we'll link you directly through our website, studio10.tv. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, up next, I'm going to bring you my review of Harrison Ford and Brendan Fraser in Extraordinary Measures in this week's Hooray for Hollywood. So don't go away. Studio 10 will be right back after this.
My mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was hard on our whole family. Fortunately,